Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of the Emerald Planet and Emerald Planet TV. We come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, the technology, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we have a planet of 9 billion people by 2038 and possibly 12 to 13 billion by the end of this century, how are we going to be able to take care of all these people on planet Earth? And that's what Emerald Planet's all about. We come to you looking at the solutions, the best practices from around the globe as we create the Emerald Planet. Hello, welcome to the Emerald Planet. We're making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And seeing the long-term impacts of climate change. We're glad to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Master Your Disaster is a tome about how to look at disasters in a very different way. Looking at disasters in a way that you actually are solving the problems, hopefully before you even have the disaster. But there are a number of ideas, concepts, and working models that we're going to be discussing with Leann Hackman-Carty. She is the author of Master Your Disaster. So, Leann, welcome to the Emerald Planet TV.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Tell us, what is Master Your Disaster as a book, and why a book?
Well, actually, starting in 2013, I actually was working with a number of communities after a flood. There was about, in my province, I live in Canada, and in my province, a third of our province was underwater. And I reached out and started working with these communities because my background's actually economic development, working with them on their recovery, on their economic and business recovery. And then in 2016, our northern part of our province was on fire. I worked with that community up there for over a year on their business and economic recovery. And at the end of all of that, I sat down and I thought, if I can't find the resources I need to help these communities, because I looked far and wide, I thought, then I better develop something. So that's actually why I wrote the book. I thought, I think we need simple information, templates, processes in place to help individuals, businesses, and communities. So that's why I wrote the book.
That's absolutely fantastic. Now, we have this Master Your Disaster with this image that you shared with us. This is incredible. You have just about everything going on. It looks like the apocalypse. So looking at disasters, we have now the coronavirus, the pandemic, natural disasters going on absolutely everywhere. So you see this swirl going on here, and the lightning is just like, you know, the world is coming to an end. But how do we look at it from the standpoint, maybe this could be opportunity looking at us in the face?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at things like this, part of my reason for doing what I do is I truly believe that if every individual, business, and community was more prepared, we wouldn't see the impacts we're having. So when you see something like a tornado or, you know, some of these things, we can't stop from happening, but we can certainly mitigate our risks, and we can certainly do things. There are things in our control, and that's what that's the message I want to get to people is take the steps you can to actually control what you can control. And preparation and mitigation is a big part of that.
That's absolutely fantastic. Looking at this wheel that we have in front of us, it's very busy, a lot for our audiences to be able to see here and abroad. But give us a good summary of what we're looking at, and how does this relate directly back to Master Your Disaster?
Well, for those who are in an emergency management kind of profession, they use this wheel all the time. This is their continuum. So they basically see the emergency response continuum in 4 phases. So they've got, the yellow part is the prevention and mitigation part. So what are you going to do in advance to prevent something from happening to you? It's reducing your risk. The second piece, that blue part, is the preparedness. So how are you going to be prepared if it's, say, a municipality? How are you preparing your various operations to respond? So it could be advanced planning, advanced preparedness trainings. They have ICS training for, say, a lot of people in the field. So that piece is the preparedness piece. The response, see, the incident there is the black, but the response piece is really well, in my opinion, more well orchestrated than some of these other phases, because it's like a military operation. You've got one person in charge. In the case of in the US, you've got FEMA that will step in, and they've got very clear roles and responsibilities of what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and who's in charge. Now, what happens when you get to the green part, and that's the part where I have focused a lot of my energy, it is the worst part, in my opinion, because nobody's in charge. And there's no money, and there's no finite timeline as far as, you know, today it's going to be short-term recovery, and then in 10 days we're going to flip to immediate recovery. It just doesn't work like that. So that's the part where I think most individuals, communities, businesses, they fall down flat on the recovery. And so obviously we're taping this at the time of COVID, and that's the part that really concerns me most, is what is that recovery going to look like? It's terrible in the best of times. So that's what this chart shows. It's just how that wheel turns, and really where you can actually put effort into each of those phases to help reduce your recovery time.
And the whole thing about this too is that we really don't know what this looks like, because you have pandemics now coming on top of very severe, costly natural disasters. And so nobody really knows. There is no such thing as new normal. It's just we know it's changing. But going back to Fort McMurray, Canada, these huge fires, you talked about the flooding. This sounds like Australia and many other countries now, where you're having massive wildfires, massive flooding going on all at the same time. And of course, all this brings various different types of diseases and other impacts way beyond what we can even imagine as humankind, because they're not coming, you know, one after another. They're coming at the same time.
Yeah, and it's obviously putting a lot of stress on systems. You know, Puerto Rico is another good example. Puerto Rico, I was there in November, and part of the challenges, they had the hurricanes, the bad hurricanes, Irma, Maria, and then they had earthquakes after Christmas, and now they've got COVID, and also hurricane season is coming again. So you just think of, I mean, the mental health piece of this too. You look at these people, like, disasters change you. I have yet to meet a person who's lived through a disaster and came out the other side the same. It impacts you and how you think of things, and the trauma that you went through, depending on the nature, the scope of the disaster. When there's deaths involved, it becomes that much more complicated. So in these situations, I just look at them and I think, we have to start thinking about things differently. We have to start looking at resilience and how we plan and how we prepare and mitigate. I mean, it comes back to that wheel.
Yeah. And then I really like this image that you have here, relief, get back to business. But, you know, we're going to have to rediscover this all over again, because of the complexities that we're having, the multiplier effects, because of the severity of the natural disasters. The scope and scale of the pandemics are, you know, unprecedented. So, you know, looking at this relief, get back to business, how do we really even think about that when, as soon as as you were talking about Puerto Rico, they're in Hurricane Alley, they're going to get the hurricanes no matter what, because they're in the perfect path of the hurricanes.
And that's where, you know, a lot of the work that I do one-on-one with businesses is really helping them understand, okay, so what are the potential risks that your business faces? Because say it's Puerto Rico, so you might face earthquake, you might face a hurricane, flooding, whatever it is. Now, each business is different. So if you're in a service-related business versus a product manufacturing business, so, you know, each business is slightly different. But what are the things that you got to think of now? Because now is the time to think about these things. And what could you do? What little things can you do to make sure that if that thing happens to you, you are not going to be impacted as poorly as you would have been had you not taken those steps? So I think it's tough on businesses, especially small businesses, because they're just trying to make ends meet. They're trying to pay bills, like trying to pay themselves. So to ask them to do more and more is tough. But as a business person, you have to be strategic in what you put your energy towards, because if you don't look at your potential risks, they could actually put you out of business.
Absolutely, and that's unfortunately what it is. Looking at COVID-19, and we want to move on here so we get over all these key concepts. How is this changing the face as far as, and I'm going to use this in quotation marks, disasters that are striking around the globe, because this is something that spreads very quickly. It can be in an airplane, and it's literally everywhere on Earth within about 24 to 48 hours.
This one is an interesting one, because I think, I'm actually doing some work here in my region, and we polled them to say, what are your biggest hazards you're worried about? Pandemics didn't even come up on the list. And I think if we polled them today, it might actually come up number one. So I don't think anyone had really thought of COVID, maybe health, the WHO, places like that had thought of it. But I don't think most communities took this seriously. And now they're having to look at this, and this is going to change everything. Like I was working with some people this morning and talking about how organizations are going to have to transform themselves. It will not be business as usual. And I think we're naive to think it will be. So we need to think now, what are the things that potentially are going to change as a result of COVID? And let's start thinking about how we're going to adapt to that now.
Yeah, and the whole thing about this, Leann, is we have to start thinking both from resilience, but also strategically, how do we handle this before it ever really happens? And that's where we come into, I like your diagram here, top business challenges. What would we list as, say, top 2 or 3 business challenges beyond survival that we've already talked about, particularly for small business? What other things do they need to be thinking about in these days of pandemics and natural disasters coming one right after the other or on top of each other?
I know when we poll businesses, when we do surveys after disasters, and we're doing some with COVID right now, finances, cash flow is always a very significant issue for small businesses, because most of them, I actually asked accountants, I said, look, how much do you tell your clients to keep as far as a cash, like a kitty, in case of an emergency? And they said, well, we like to advise them at least 3 to 6 months. And I said, well, is that what they do? And they said, no, they're lucky if they have a month. And that's part of the thing. So if you're going along and you only have 1 month buffer, if all heck breaks loose, that's not a lot of time, right, especially if you have a lot of expenses. Right. So cash flow is always an issue. And then the other one that's always major is communication. Number one, it's number one in many disasters, because traditional communications networks are compromised. I always tell people, even in your family, to communicate is tough in a normal time, let alone a disaster when everything changing.
Leann, we're absolutely running out of time. Recovery is tough. We can't really go through this chart. What would be 3 key points that you want people to have as a takeaway from our conversation tonight about recovery is tough, but you can do it? And we got to be quick. We only have about 30 seconds.
I honestly think the best time to get prepared is now. And so looking at your recovery, we have to get through what we're going through right now and mitigate. But I urge everyone to think about what's tomorrow going to look like, because it's going to come. And the best thing to do is figure out how to be prepared now.
I tell you, that's actually a good summary. We got many other things that we could go through. But what do you see as far as your Master Your Disaster, its expansion, as far as being a book, a must-read book? And you've got about 10 seconds to do all that.
I'm just trying to get out the best resources possible to people, because I know that when the time comes, you're totally stressed out trying to find the right information, and I just want to make sure it's there.
Okay, Leann Hackman-Carty, author, Master Your Disaster. Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
Thank you very much.